Hi, everyone. We're going to give it a few more seconds for people to come in from the waiting room, and then we'll get started. Hi, I'm Georgie Gaines, and I am a parent support volunteer for F.E.A.S.T. And I also have lived experience as the mom of a daughter with an eating disorder. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please stay muted with your camera off during the webinar, and please drop any questions that you have into the chat box. We will be answering questions as we go along, and/or we will answer them at the end of the webinar. So please, at any time, add your questions to the chat box. Okay, I think we can get started now. I'm really excited about our topic tonight. We're going to be having a conversation about the effect of eating disorders on siblings. We're going to have an authentic conversation with 3 siblings who have lived experience having sisters with eating disorders. And I'm lucky enough to know these special people, Georgie, Sam, and Sunday, because I work with them in a collaboration between F.E.A.S.T and ANAD, and they have all been trained as sibling support group leaders. And so we're going to start out tonight hearing a little bit from each one of them. I would love it if you 3 would introduce yourselves one at a time and give us a little bit of background about your story and your experience being a sibling. Who'd like to go first?
I can go first.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah. Okay. So my name's Sam. I'm 19. I'm going into my sophomore year of college. I have 2 sisters, one older, one younger. My older sister was diagnosed with anorexia when she was in 5th grade and I was in 3rd. And it's hard to say when someone's fully recovered, but her last time going to treatment was when she was 16, and since then she's been doing really, really well. So I was pretty young for a lot of that, but I felt how it was having that in the family growing up. And then I think my younger sister had a pretty hard time with it. She's 4 years younger than I am, so she was in kindergarten when it started. And she also has, in the last couple of years, been diagnosed with depression. So I kind of have a lot of experience being the sibling of someone who's struggling. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Sam. Georgie, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Georgie, also a sibling support group leader. I am 23 and I work full time, so I've been out of college for a little bit over a year now. But I was in college for quite a bit of my experience as someone who has a sibling with an eating disorder. I have 2 siblings, actually. I have a younger sister who is now 21, and I have a younger brother who's now 16. And my sister is the one who experienced the eating disorder. So she was diagnosed with anorexia when oh goodness, she was about 15 and I was 17 when she was first diagnosed. So we were both in high school together, and we've kind of experienced it through high school, through me going off to college and then later her going off to college. But she's doing really well now, is about to enter her senior year of college. So very excited about that year for her. And that's sort of where my experience comes from.
Sunday?
Hello, everyone. I'm Sunday, like the day. I am an older sibling. I have 2 younger sisters, and my youngest sister was diagnosed with anorexia about 2 years ago. So we're actually still in the treatment progress right now. And we are excited because she is showing a lot of progress, but of course there's still a lot of hardship every day. So I'm also a sibling support group leader and just very passionate about that relationship between the sibling and the eating disorder patient. So yeah, I'm 25 years old. And so my mom and I sometimes joke that I'm like the dad of the family while she does treatment. And then my little sister who has anorexia is 20.
Okay, thank you all for introducing yourselves, and just thank you for being here tonight. And thank you for being sibling support group leaders. It's a brand new model. And from what I understand, there are a lot of parents like myself who worried about how is this impacting my other kids? How is this impacting my kids that don't have the eating disorder? It's not always talked about. It's not something that a lot of people understand or know about, but it's really important. And for you all to be here and sharing your stories, I think is really helpful to a lot of people. So I just want to thank you for that. And I also want to ask you kind of a hard question. And please, everyone, if you're coming up with questions as you're hearing them speak, please put them into the chat box and I will give them the question to answer. But my question is, how has being the sibling of someone with an eating disorder impacted you? And you can jump in if you want to answer that question, and you can talk to each other back and forth about it, however you'd like to answer that.
I can go ahead and jump in. This is definitely a difficult question, so I feel like we all need a second to think it through. But also, I think I can kind of speak through it and think about it as I speak, and hopefully I don't ramble too much. But it's definitely, in a really strange way, made me and my sister a lot closer. And that's not the answer that maybe you would expect, but I definitely feel that my sister and I have bonded a lot through this experience. And that I don't know that that would necessarily be the case for every single person and family who experienced this. Did I freeze? Okay, sorry. But I think that in my situation, I feel like there was that positive at the end of a long journey. And it was really due to my sister being so willing to let me in, which she didn't necessarily have to do. A lot of the eating disorder experience can be feeling shut out, feeling isolated. It's really hard to find your footing as a sibling, but my sister's just kind of incredible. And we were close to begin with, but I definitely felt, especially at the very beginning and during times when she maybe had moments of relapse, like I was losing my sister. Like I was going to enter my adult life and future phases of my life without her, and just not, I wouldn't feel like the big sister anymore, even with my younger brother, without that sister being there for me. So seeing that I'm now farther through that experience, and not only did I not lose her, but like I got her back fully, and I feel like our relationship has actually really flourished because she's been so vulnerable with me, and I've then been vulnerable with her in return. I would say that that's like the greatest impact that I could say I've experienced from all of this. Yeah, there's been some negative stuff too. Definitely like some hard moments that I wish that none of us would have had to experience. But at the end of the day, I think like that would be my biggest takeaway. And maybe I'm also just biasedly trying to put a positive spin on it, even though we all know it's not all positive. But I do truly believe in that and feel really grateful that that's the result, even if I'm not grateful for the experience that got us there. But I'm sure Sam and Sunday will have other things to add to that as well.
Yeah, I can really relate to that feeling of being a lot closer. At the same time, having a sibling with an eating disorder drastically changed my life because I graduated from college and I had all of these plans to move places and do things. And once I found out 2 years ago that my sister had been diagnosed, my life came to a halt, and I chose to help her and move in back with my mother after years of independence. And I wouldn't change that decision ever. Looking back, I'm so grateful that I did. But I also have been realizing there's some grieving that comes with an eating disorder for every member of the family, of course, especially for the eating disorder patient. But this is an emotional question because you have to, despite loving and caring for your eating disorder child or sibling so much, also acknowledge like, well, maybe a lot of adults have to quit their jobs while during treatment, or maybe you've lost time with friends or family, or you feel disconnected from your social connections. And so it's been really hard to just there's kind of this wall of isolation, not only because you don't have time because treatment takes so much, but also because a lot of people can't understand what you're going through. So it's kind of this eerie, I'm sure all of you can relate, feeling of no one knows what I'm going through. But the sibling support group has been amazing for that, because we log on and you don't even have to explain anything. You just go on and you say, hey, I'm a sibling who has a sibling with an eating disorder. And everyone just nods and they're like, yeah. So it's been therapeutic. But yeah, also hard.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys have said, basically. I think it's very different for the siblings. Like, we've talked to siblings on the support groups who have basically like taken the pressure of looking out for everyone in their family, and also siblings who have just kind of felt like neglected. So I think it's very different for me, because like Sunday was basically graduating college and I was 9 years old. So that was a little different, but I think I've never really thought about its impact, but I think it kind of probably shaped me a little bit, because my response, I don't think I really had a complex understanding, at least at first, of like if I was missing out on anything or how it was changing my life. But I think it kind of made me like naturally just want to look out for people, and kind of like, if my family is going through all this, I needed to bring some positivity. But I didn't feel that, like, I think a lot of siblings feel that in a negative, oppressive way, but I didn't feel like that. I think it kind of just shaped me into like being the person to kind of give someone a hug or something, like just that kind of personality. Yeah.
Thank you all for sharing. And it does kind of highlight how different it is for each family, like you said, Sam, how it's different for each individual. But I think one thing that is similar for everyone is that it's just such a difficult and challenging thing to go through as a sibling. And you can feel so isolated in that when no one else really knows what it's like to be in that situation. And that's one of the things that I love the most about being able to offer the sibling support groups. Like you were saying, Sunday, you just log on and you already know that people understand you and they already know what you're going through. And that's really special. I'm going to ask probably another hard question. I'm not seeing any questions coming up in the chat quite yet, but please, if anything's coming up for you as you're watching and listening, please drop it in the chat box and we will ask the panelists the question. What is something that you wish that your parents had done differently to support you during your sister's treatment and recovery? And it's okay if you don't have an answer to that, but I think it's really important, even for me here on this call, to hear maybe it's not something parents are able to see when they're going through it, because they kind of have blinders on and they're focused on the child that has the eating disorder. And I know they're thinking about the other siblings, but maybe their capacity is so low and their resources are so depleted that they just have nothing left. But if you could wish for something, I think all the parents and caregivers would like to know what is it that could have helped you that maybe you didn't get, you didn't have access to, or just no one knew to offer to you.
I had a thought. I was talking to a therapist, which number one, I think that has come up a lot in sibling group already, that and sometimes this isn't possible. Sometimes there aren't enough funds to have therapists for every child, let alone the child with the eating disorder. But if possible, a therapist for that, all the siblings would be amazing. And it has had a great impact on me. I've only been in it for like 2 months and it's changing my life. But my therapist and I were talking about how in the space of me, my mom, and my sibling with the eating disorder, I had no one to tell how hard the experience was for me. And it's making me emotional. But my mom didn't have the capacity to hear how hard it was for me because she was stressed about my sister. And my sister didn't have the capacity because she's going through treatment. And so I know, like, friends and encouraging as much like talking with outside parties as possible for the parents' part in favor of the siblings, because is necessary, because whether it's like, I can't be there for you, so you need to go to your friend's house, grandma, aunt, uncle, anyone that they can talk to about about this because it's really hard to talk with your parents. Simultaneously, my therapist said, but what would happen if you and your mom sat down and said, this is really hard? And I did that the very next day. And it was so emotional, but it also felt freeing because I think my mom had felt the same way. Like she couldn't talk to me. Who could she talk to? So it kind of strengthened us to be able to say, we love our sister and child with the eating disorder so much. And let's acknowledge how hard this is for us too. And it was really healing. And one more thought is that just a few weeks ago in the sibling support group, one of the siblings who's in high school said that they found themselves wishing that they had the eating disorder instead of their sibling. And my heart just went out to that person because it just showed how much they felt this lack of attention from their parents, that they would wish they were the ones who were ill. So yeah.
I have an answer that sort of is like the exact same thing that Sunday said, and also the exact opposite of what Sunday just said. Because you're so right. Like, I think that not having that outlet, and that's something that I don't think we think about that often in an eating disorder context, is that when you're a parent and your child is going through an eating disorder, you lose a lot. Like, that is an incredibly trying experience. But also when you're a sibling and you have a sibling going through that, you lose your sibling, but also you lose like that person that you might have turned to when you are having a hard time. And I don't think that's really what's happening in like most caregiver child relationships, but that is what most sibling relationships are. Even if it is like, as an older sibling relying on my younger sibling, she was like the person I would talk to if there was something going on in my family that I was having a hard time with. And then, like Sunday was saying, you obviously are not going to turn to that person to talk to them about the stress you're going through on their behalf. Like, that's just not how it works. But I would say that like the one thing that I wish my parents would have done, or maybe just that I wish had happened, I don't know that I can say that this was really like possible at the time, was actually having more conversations, not about necessarily like how hard or how stressful it is, even though it's really important to have an outlet for that, but about like, what can I do? What is my role as the sibling so that I feel empowered? I feel like I'm a part of this and like I'm helping. And I think that is like half of what we get in group. There are some people who feel like I'm not getting the attention that I need. And then the other half is like, I really want to help and I don't know how. And at the end of the day, it's like, it's so hard to know. And maybe there aren't concrete ways that you can step in and do stuff. But I wish that I would have had more conversations, even if like I initiated them, more so than my parents coming to me to initiate them, about what exactly am I supposed to do? And, that would come up in things like, my sister was really bad about like hiding her snacks at certain points. And especially when I, like, my freshman year of college, she kind of had a hard time again. And I would come home after break and I would like find her snacks in my room. And I'd be like, what do I do? Do I confront her? Do I tell my parents? Do I not say anything? I have no idea if this was like from months ago or from yesterday. And it was just like something that I wish I would have talked to my parents and thought that through before it even happened. And so it's like impossible to know that that was going to happen, but also we know that some things like that are going to happen, right? Because that is part of the eating disorder experience. So I just wish that I would have had more moments where I took initiative and was like, what is my purpose in this? Or do I need to not be a part of it at all, as far as like enforcing treatment decisions? And instead be like the happy, fun one who comes home and does everything I can to try to get her to smile for the day. Because I think the sibling role can look like so many different things, that having that conversation with your children can be really helpful. And I think it helps them feel really empowered as well. That was my long, rambly answer.
Yeah, I agree 100% with both you. I think so much of the struggle of being a sibling is the feeling of just being neglected or feeling neglected. And I think just having a simple conversation every now and then, even if there's nothing important to be said, but just the fact that you're having the conversation from parent to sibling makes the sibling feel seen and like that they can be a part of this instead of just being off to the side. And then personally, I was actually talking about this with my dad like a month ago. It seemed like a really small thing at the time, but when we were very little, my younger sister and I shared a bedroom. And I think at some point early after my older sister was diagnosed, we split bedrooms. And it kind of just seemed like the natural thing to do, like we were growing up. But in retrospect, I think my younger sister was 6 years old, and just having the room with me, who I was like, we were kind of the only two people in the house that were at least somewhat removed from this. It was like a very safe space. And I think going to bed every night with someone else in the room, I think would have been really good for her, just to feel less invisible and alone. So that was kind of, we were like, yeah, that probably wasn't handled the best way, but there was no way for us to know it at the time. Yeah.
Thank you all. I know that wasn't the easiest question. We have a question in the chat that I'm going to ask, and then any of the three of you that want to answer it, please jump in. How do you deal with the feeling of guilt that your sibling has an eating disorder and you don't, and you see them upset and challenged every day, and you feel guilty for enjoying life, food, and regular activities?
I can take this one. I talked, my older sister who's recovered, has an amazing perspective about like the whole process. And I've had a lot of deep talks with her, and she's helped me a lot be a sibling with my younger sister, because she's kind of been there and she can see it from both sides now. And she told me that you can't heal for someone. And that, just like the way she said it, it was one of the most freeing things I've ever heard, because she felt like when she had the eating disorder, like she could feel all of our like just constant desire for her to get better. Like it was just kind of always the elephant in the room. And that like no matter how hard I wish for something to happen, it's not going to change the status of what your sibling is going through. So kind of really understanding that it is their journey and you can't heal for them, and you just thinking about it and wishing it super hard isn't going to change anything, kind of has allowed me to give myself my own space, and realize that the best way for me to help the process is to take care of myself and give myself some space when I need it, so that I can still be a genuinely happy and loving person when I'm around whoever's struggling, instead of just being like frantically wishing for them to get better, because I think that just makes everyone kind of more uptight. So kind of recognizing how it's their own journey and you need to kind of take a step away for both of your own benefit has helped me a lot not feel guilty with it.
Yeah, I really love that message of like you can't heal for another person, and I thank you to Sam and Sam's sister for that, because I feel like it's something that it's just a really important message, and it's not something you hear every day. And I also think this is just a really good question, because guilt comes up in so many ways for siblings in this position, and I think it's something that we talk about pretty frequently in group. And yes, some of that guilt is definitely from like, I'm still living my life. I still like to, go to that summer 4th of July barbecue, or go to my grandma's house and have cookies with her, whatever the case may be. And it is hard to experience those things and expect those things to be really exciting and fun, and then see that your sibling cannot share in them with you, especially if it's something that they have shared in with you in the past. For me, that was definitely like, and I'm sorry if I'm speaking too much on specific foods, if that's triggering for anyone, but just as like a specific example, for me and my sister, it was definitely like birthday cakes. We love to bake, and this is something that we've come back to now that she's recovered, but it was something that for a while was part of her eating disorder, and we didn't really understand that. And looking back, I think is when I feel the guilt, because I still wanted a birthday cake. I still wanted that experience with her of baking it together to celebrate the birthday of anyone in our family. And I now know that was part of her eating disorder, was obsessing over it, getting it perfect, and then probably restricting herself from eating it and enjoying it. So that definitely is like part of where I would feel the guilt. But also I think it's just important to note that guilt comes up for a lot of people in terms of thinking that they maybe like contributed to the origins of the eating disorder, which is something else we've talked about in group. Maybe the other siblings started out with the restrictive or binge behaviors. Maybe like for me, I have always had a weight issue as well. And it's never been about my eating behaviors, but I have, you know, especially before my sister was diagnosed, I definitely, you know, went on diets or tried to restrict my eating in very specific ways to get a result that I wanted. And that's not something that like you do once you have a sibling with an eating disorder. It definitely changes your perspective. But I think I felt a lot of guilt on that end of things too. But the real question you're asking is how do you deal with it, which is a difficult thing to answer. But I think for me, giving myself a lot of grace, for one, reminding myself that I am just a human being too. I'm a young human being. You know, I was 17, just barely, when my sister was diagnosed. Still had a lot of learning to do, and I still do now. So when I look back on things and wish that I would have behaved differently, I think I just try to look at it as a learning experience and give myself that grace. And just in general, like try to feel like me enjoying something in the long run helps my sister enjoy something as well. If I can like frame it as, if I can experience joy, I can hold space for her to experience that joy too, at least eventually, has also kind of helped me like process these feelings of guilt and think about like, how can my enjoyment then translate into her enjoyment, which is a difficult thing to do. But I think at the end of the day, it's just like a question of framework and how you are looking at things. But really good question.
And we have another question, unless Sunday, did you want to answer to that too? We can go on to the next question. Okay. As a parent, how can you help your children to rekindle their relationship? That's another really good question.
I could start with that. Going into treatment, my mom and I both had no clue what was going to happen until we started, and we assumed that I would be helping with cooking in the kitchen or helping with the refeeding. If my mom needed to go to work, maybe I would be in charge of monitoring lunch. And then once we started, we realized that siblings should not be a caregiver, they should be a support. And this will look different for some families. Like I know there are some siblings where they had to step in and do all the caregiving by themselves, but usually if the parents are there to do the caregiving, or a caregiver role can do it, or maybe it's outpatient or inpatient. In general, I think it's best for a sibling to be the support, and this helps with the bond, because if a sibling is they're saying, eat your food, just like the parents, then the child with the eating disorder is going to feel very attacked from all angles. But if you can really encourage, and even like Georgie was talking about, sitting down and having a conversation about what is your role as a sibling, if a parent can let the sibling know, this is not your responsibility to be enforcing the rules, to be telling your sister or brother, sibling what to and not to eat. I know that really freed me up from a lot of guilt, even going back to the last question. and gave my sister and I the opportunity to just have fun together and seeing myself as a distraction for her. And I think that that has really fostered our relationship, because now it's like, oh, lunch was horrible. And then she's like, Sunday, do you want to leave the house and get out of here? This place is triggering me. I want to go to the park and sit in the sun. And so we can, and siblings might do like secret roles, like not that secret, but like Georgie, when you notice that there was snacks being hidden in your room, or if I see that my sister is cutting some of the snacks that we're allowed to do together now, you can always report back to the parent, but it should always be not directly to your sibling, in my opinion. I'm sure it's different for different families, but if I noticed something was going on, I should go to my parent and say, hey, I noticed my sibling is doing this, you deal with it. And that keeps my relationship with my sister really, really great. So I would say that that's really important to tell your kids, like, this isn't up to you. If you see something, tell me, because that's going to help us with recovery, but you don't have to deal with it yourself. And I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that, but.
I would just add the other thing that like kind of helped me and my sister, I think, and I have to give my mom credit for this because it's something that she like really encouraged both of us to think about, is separating the eating disorder from your child or your sibling, whatever the case may be, because that means that when I, walk away at the end of a long day, I'm not thinking that my sister behaved like this, my sister said this mean thing to me, my sister whatever. I'm thinking the eating disorder did those things, and the eating disorder is not here to stay. Like, my sister is here to stay. So I think it's a really hard thing to do, and like you're still going to feel all the bad feelings that come up when the eating disorder is in charge. But at the end of the day, that is not who your sibling is. That's not who your child is. And that part that's in them can heal. I think that recovery is always possible. And I actually said this the other day in group as well, when we were talking about, like, is this something you share with your friends, or is it something that you keep to yourself? And I kind of mentioned that I don't tell people that often about my sister having an eating disorder, not because I don't want to talk about it, because it is really important to share and be vulnerable, but because I don't want people to then meet her afterwards and think, oh, it's the one who had an eating disorder. Because, and I kind of realized this as I was saying it, that is not any part of who my sister is when I think about her. It's like, it's not even something I consider, even though it's been like 6 years of watching her go through that and going through it with her. It's just, that's not who she is. So I think that means that I have really internalized that message that my sister is not the eating disorder, and it's a separate thing that is she's experiencing in a given moment. But I can walk away from that and remember who my sister is, and that's the person I have a relationship with. So I think that has really helped me, and that's part of the reason that we have grown closer during all of this.
Yeah, I think those are both really beautiful answers. And I would add just a small thing. I think from the parent perspective of like trying to get your siblings to rekindle their relationship, because I think that was the question. I think, I don't know, again, this is kind of my personal opinion, I'm not an expert, but I think you can't put too much pressure on it, because I think they'll both sense that, and it will make things harder. And I think the one role that the sibling can play, like do very well, is just kind of what Sunday was talking about, just the easy relationship, where this is the one relationship that can stay unchanged, potentially, if they can still just be your sibling. And also sometimes the relationship does just go through a really hard patch, and that's just kind of how it is. Like, you can't really just avoid all the bad parts that come with the eating disorder. Like, I think my sister and I we didn't fight that much, but we weren't as close. We didn't hang out as much for a bunch of years. But then after, once they're recovered, you close that gap very naturally and very easily, like right away, like, oh, you're back. And then it's basically it. And now she's my best friend again. So I think sometimes, although it's really hard to do, just giving it time and space, like you kind of can't force it to be if it's not gonna be.
Oh, thank you all for sharing that. That was a really good question. And each of you had something different to offer that I think is really helpful. I know if I had heard that as a mom when I was going through it, it would have made me feel really good that there was a way for my kids to maintain their really good relationships, and that the eating disorder wasn't going to, in the end, destroy that. It was just very beautifully said by all of you. If any more questions come up in the chat, we will pivot to that. But for right now, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the sibling support groups. And I thought I'd start by asking you three why you decided to become a sibling support group leader for F.E.A.S.T and ANAD. And whoever wants to chime in and go first.
I can go ahead. Oh no, go ahead, Sam. Sam, you go first. I've been talking.
Okay. No, you haven't. Well, George and I got involved in similar ways because both of our parents work with the parent caregiver groups. So that's kind of how I heard about it. And I immediately wanted to do it just because I had felt what it was like to be a sibling, and I saw how hard it was for my little sister. And I also know that it's kind of a thing that really, like, eating disorders as a whole are already not kind of talked about or in the open as much, and the sibling role is basically ignored by most people. So it kind of was just like, this is something I felt very firsthand how hard it is, and it just made a ton of sense to me, like how much of a help it could be for people. And yeah, it just seemed awesome. So I was kind of excited right away.
Yeah, I was in a similar boat with how I like logistically came to it, and I think I was so interested in it just because I think it would have been so helpful if I had had a group like that who understood me and what I was experiencing when I was going through it with my sister, but also just I've always felt like if I can even reach like one person, if I can help one person with my experience, then I will feel like there was some good that came out of this whole thing for my sister. And of course, at the end of the day, I would not want her to have that experience, period. But if I can help someone, I can feel empowered by that, and I can feel like some healing happening. So it's been a really great experience. Like Sunday said earlier, kind of therapeutic for us group leaders as well.
Well put, Georgie and Sam. I guess the reason I joined as a sibling support group leader was our family uses Equip Health, which is a fully virtual online treatment. Shout out because they're amazing. And I joined one of their sibling support groups, and at the time it was also very new, and I think there were just 3 of us. I was the oldest one there. I think everyone else was in elementary school. And I think I've told this story in the sibling support group, but we were all sitting there and they were like, oh, does anyone have anything to bring up today? And it was really on my mind that whenever times were very, very trying in the house, as the sibling, I can't speak up during those kind of battles between the ED and the caregiver. And so I had to physically bite my tongue not to add things and support my mom or argue with the ED. And so I found myself playing Angry Birds on the couch to just kind of drown it out. Like I needed something to distract me because I couldn't participate, but it was so stressful. And I mentioned that and I saw all the eyes of the little elementary school siblings in there light up, like, and then the group leader, who is this awesome caregiver, was like, yeah, actually, that's a great idea. Everyone go download Angry Birds or whatever game you like, because it's okay to distract yourself. And sometimes that's exactly what you need because you can't do anything else. And so after that experience, I felt how empowering it was to talk to other siblings, and also how I just felt so validated in my experiences. So here I am now.
Well, I'm so glad that all of you decided to do it. And I know it is validating for everyone who comes to your support groups, and that's so helpful in the whole process. We have some more questions coming up, so I'm going to ask the next one. Did you feel the sibling groups should be required? My son's 10 years old and 15 years old refuse, and I'm not sure if I should force or not. That's a really good question. I can answer one little piece of that. The sibling support groups, the minimum age is 15 years old, and it's kind of because of what Sunday was just talking about. If you have like the elementary age and then you have like the teen or even the young adult siblings, it's really hard to meet everyone's needs in one group setting. And so we did the age cutoff at age 15 and up. And then the youngest you can be to be a sibling support group leader is 18. And so I'm going to let the siblings themselves answer the rest of that question. What do you think? What would your answer be to that?
Even though I had the option to join that sibling support group that I was talking about, that was the one time I went in 2 years. And I know I had this desire to go, first of all, and it sounds like your sons don't even have that desire, at least right now. It's kind of daunting. And a lot of the times your days are so hectic, it's hard to follow a schedule, or you're just exhausted and you don't feel like going and talking about your experiences. So I don't know if I would require it, but maybe just strongly encourage and just kind of say, hey, I've talked to other siblings who this has been helpful for. And even if they aren't old enough for this group, I'm sure you can find other groups, or like I know I had the option through Equip for, they had, after trying it with a large age range, they switched it to young group, middle age group, and then like above 20 or something like that. So I strongly recommend it, but I know that I wasn't forced to go and then I didn't go for a long time. So I think it's kind of when you're ready, but I don't know if you guys have anything to add.
I kind of wanted to just ask, go ahead, Georgie.
No, I was just gonna say, I totally agree with you, Sunday. Like, I feel like keep offering it. Also, like, let them know, especially your 15-year-old, that he's welcome to come and not even participate and just sit and listen and feel the energy in that space, if that feels like maybe a little bit more interesting to him. But I personally just don't think it's something you can really push. And if it's there when he does need it, then that's the best thing.
And just off of that, go ahead, Sam.
Oh, sorry. I kind of agree. I think it definitely depends on the family, but if you're like completely forcing them to go, I don't know if you would get anything out of it, because it'd be pretty easy to join and just sit there like this and like not sit. Like if you have the mindset like, I hate this is stupid, like then it's probably just ruling him out from going another time. But I would definitely recommend encouraging, and like Georgie said, he could just listen, and I think kind of just enforcing the idea that like our groups are as relaxed as possible, and literally as nothing is expected of the people joining. Like it's just, we've been through this, we're here to talk. You don't need to answer any questions if you don't want there to. You can sit there silently. You don't need to have anything prepared. There's nothing formal. Like it's just a bunch of people who have been through the same really tough situation and are just here to talk if you want to talk to them. So maybe that would, if he's like scared of it, maybe that would help, but I don't really know what the situation is. So
That's great. That pretty much answered. I was going to have one of you just briefly describe for anyone who's either a sibling and thinking about coming to one of the support groups, or a parent who's maybe trying to convince a sibling to come to one of the support groups, what the format is. And I know, Sam, you've described it really well, that it was very laid back and no pressure, but just a little bit more of an idea of what it actually is. Would one of you want to describe that?
We do have, oh, go ahead, Sam.
No, you got it, Sunday.
I was just gonna say, we do have one participant who comes and they don't say anything the whole time, but you can tell that they're getting something from just listening. But it's basically a very small group right now on Zoom, log in, everyone says their name, who they're supporting, and then we just talk. And sometimes people come with questions that are burning that they want answered, and other times there's a long silence and we kind of prompt something that we were thinking about that week, and then it lasts anywhere from 30 minutes to 90 minutes. And at the end, we sometimes do a checkout question, like what's something you thought of today that you want to bring it with you into the week. I know we recently led one where we asked, what's one distraction that you can do when it's hard? And then, yeah, it's very, very laid back and supportive.
Thank you, because I think it is a little intimidating to just go to quote a support group and not know exactly what it is or what's expected of you. So I think it's really helpful to know that in advance. And let's see, we have some more questions here. How do you navigate the eating disorder topic with the sibling? Is it best to open up a conversation about it or allow the sibling to bring things up if they want? I don't live in the same state as my sibling and I don't want them to feel like I'm ignoring it, but I also don't want to bring it up if it's not helpful. It's an excellent question.
I have a question about the question. So I just want to clarify, is this from the perspective of a sibling asking how do they navigate the conversation with their sibling who's struggling with the eating disorder?
That's my understanding,
Okay.
since it says I don't live in the same state as my sibling and I don't want to feel like I'm ignoring it. So that's my understanding. You can put in the chat if I have that wrong.
Haley
They
already
said
gave
yes.
it a yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So what do you all think about that question?
Okay, I can try to answer it. I think it's a really hard question to answer because it depends so much on your relationship with your sibling. Like we've actually talked about this in our groups, like some of the siblings barely talk about it with their sibling who's struggling. Some are like talking about it every day, like that's the person they talk to. So it's hard to give advice without knowing that relationship, but I always err on the side of saying it because it's not like if you send a nice simple message, just like I don't know, it seems like it could do more good than harm because like the sibling obviously knows they have an eating disorder, like nothing new is really happening, so kind of just like basically sending them a virtual hug, being like, I'm thinking of you, I'm here for you, that type of thing, I think would probably help instead of hurt. But again, it kind of depends on the relationship.
Georgie or Sunday?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think Sam's totally right that it really depends on you and your sister or your sibling and just like the relationship you already have. But I will say I don't think it ever hurts to like open the door and leave it open. And you can even say it in those terms like, I know you're going through something right now and I want to be there for you in whatever way I can be. And you can kind of leave it at that because either your sibling will let you in a little bit, and this may take time too. Like it might be something you offer over a long period of time. And either you can do something or in that moment, they just aren't ready to open up, but then they know that you're there. And sometimes that's like all they need to know. You don't even have to have the conversation. It just feels good to have your sibling say, I see you and I'm not going to like run away because you're going through a hard thing. But that being said, it's also really hard when you're not in the same place. And there were several years where I was in a completely different state for long periods of time when I was in college. and then we were in 2 different states, and then my parents were in yet a 3rd state, which makes it really difficult for sure, because it's not really something you want to text necessarily. But I do think you can leave that door open even from a faraway place, and maybe there are moments where you can call them on the phone or see them in person, and just let them know that you are there for them in whatever capacity that they need you to be.
Okay, we have another question. You talked about what parents did that helped. Is there anything that parents did or said that absolutely did not help? I imagine that this is a hard question, so thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna go for it because I immediately have an answer. Not because this is something that my parents necessarily did, but because it's something we've heard in group, and it's pretty devastating. And I don't think it was something that, anyway, I'll just say it. But comments like, "I'm so glad you aren't also sick because I couldn't handle having 2 children going through this," or like, especially if you have a second child who has already experienced an eating disorder, or at least like some disordered eating behaviors, and is doing better, saying like, "I'm so glad you aren't relapsing right now because I couldn't handle it." And I'm sure that these comments like are never meant to say, "I don't want to know if you're struggling again, and I don't want to be there to support you." But it's really, really hard to hear that. And it does like isolate you even further if you are going through something that you want to share with your parent. And that's something that people in group have said, "I'm struggling right now. I want to bring it to my parents, but my mom just said this thing. In no way am I going to be able to put that burden on her now." And I think it's just something to like have in the back of your mind, that to always be like offering that help to your other children when you have the capacity to, instead of like assuming that they are doing well just because they haven't said otherwise recently. That's all.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. I would also add, this isn't about my parents either, but I think just definitely don't wait to start the conversation with them, or don't kind of hesitate. Like, should I include them on this? Should I leave them out? I think, I feel like most of the siblings we've talked about, the problem is always feeling alone and like neglected and invisible. So if you're like on the fence about telling them something, or I don't think you need to give them the details, but like, don't hesitate to reach out and make them a part of the process. Because even if it's just like once a week, just like, "Hey, I know this is really hard. Do you have any questions for me?" Because I think with siblings, it can feel very hard to go to start that conversation and ask, because they're always feeling like, "I don't have a place in this. Everyone's so stressed. Like, the last thing I should do right now is go tell anyone I'm feeling bad or do anything like that." So just don't leave it up to them to start that conversation, because it can be a lot harder from the sibling perspective than it seems like it should be. So just take that step.
Thank you, Sam. We have another question. Our eating disorder person is now 27. Siblings are 29 and 16. The siblings are already living in different places and sometimes avoid coming home to where the eating disorder sister lives. She's recovering slowly on a little support. How do I encourage the siblings that it's safe and good to be at home with her?
That's a tricky question. I have a middle sister, so I'm the oldest, and my sister with the eating disorder is the youngest, but the sister in between us lives in a different city. And I think that the number one thing, again, talking about inclusion of siblings like Georgie and Sam have been talking about, is continuing to update the siblings who aren't living at home or nearby about the status and the progress. If doing this makes them feel like they don't want to come home, I think just talking about what an important role a sibling can play, even if it's not all the time, just talking about that role could be really helpful. And something that I discussed with the sibling group this week was that even if your sibling isn't able to express gratitude now about what you're doing as a caregiver or as a sibling, many years down the road, they will later be able to thank you. And that's something to really soak in, is that even as they start to recover, they might say something like, I love you. And it's a shock because you haven't heard something kind for a while because the ED has had the microphone. And so just encouraging them that even if they can't feel it now, any action that they take will be like very appreciated by the sibling with the eating disorder. I don't know if you guys have anything to add.
I think I would just say that it's a really difficult question because that's a really hard situation, but I think I would encourage you to allow the siblings space to not necessarily want to be home, which I know is really painful. And it's something that, like, if I were in that position as the sibling and I were trying to like communicate that I didn't feel that comfortable coming home and being around my sister with the eating disorder, I think I would either like actually not even voice that and just suck it up and come, or I would voice it with like a lot of guilt attached. So I think it's really good that that's something that like they are expressing to you, because that means they're in touch with like how they're feeling about it. They're not repressing those feelings. But I would encourage not to force it in any way. And you can definitely, like Sunday was saying, give updates, let them know how their sibling is doing, but also recognize that like they might just need that space. They might not have the capacity to be there physically at all of the times when it would, really be nice for them to be there. And that also doesn't mean that they don't care and that they don't want to, like in a spiritual way, be there for their sibling. And there might be other ways that they can be at their own place in a different state and still be like sending a lot of love and support and encouragement. And then over time, I think they will probably feel more comfortable physically being there as well. But that's a really, really difficult situation for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing as Georgie, but I was kind of scared too because it just does, like, it's so hard not knowing the situation of your family and things like that. And I think it's such a hard answer to hear probably as a parent with kids that are growing up. Like, having moments where everyone together is probably really special and rare, and you want those. And I think like you definitely want to encourage them to come home. But if they're really resisting and they really don't want to come home, maybe they shouldn't. Like, maybe it'd be bad for everyone if they did. So I don't, like, it always depends on the family, and it's so hard to give advice on a thing like this, but I think you should definitely accept that as like an option. Like, maybe getting everyone here at the same time isn't like the perfect outcome, even if you want it really bad in your heart.
Well said.
Well, we're getting really close to the end of our time, but I wanted to have one of you answer this last question really quickly, and then we can wrap up. How can a sibling who is married and not living at home act as a support person? Does anyone have any ideas?
Okay. I think I feel like I keep saying this, but it always depends on your relationship with your sibling. But even if it's phone calls, texts, even letters, I've sent letters to people that I feel like there's something more wholesome about getting a letter. Like, I never get letters, so when you get a letter, it's really special, and you can actually keep it. it's another nice thing. You can keep it in your room and like as a reminder that they're there for you basically. But yeah, I think reaching out a helping hand is always appreciated. And even if they don't like voice that appreciation, I think sometimes they'll even reject it, but then in the back of their mind, like they know like, wow, my sibling really loves me. Like they'd be really happy to see me get better. They care about me, stuff like that. So I think kind of however you can, trying to continue to give them your support in the way that fits your relationship.
Yeah, that's really, really good. I want to thank everyone for asking such good questions. And I want to thank Georgie, Sam, and Sunday especially for being here and for just being so open with what that experience is like being the sibling of someone with an eating disorder. You all, I know, helped everyone who came and anyone who comes to your groups. And I hope that everyone who's here tonight saw that I put the information for the sibling support groups in the chat. And hopefully, if you haven't already attended a group, you will come or you will encourage someone to come. And you can tell them that you met some of the sibling support group leaders and that they can feel comfortable knowing that they'll be in a safe place, because that's a really important part of it, is feeling supported, connected, and safe. And F.E.A.S.T does rely on the generosity of our community to operate our services and programs. So if you would like to make a donation, the link is up on the screen. And I think we also have another webinar coming up, multiple webinars. So there's the August, September, October, and November that you can register for on feast-ed.org. Eating disorders in males will be the next one. Suicide and eating disorders, refeeding your loved one, and recovery in the queer community. Those are the upcoming webinars. Thank you again, everyone, for being here and for participating and for just being willing to hear some of the hard answers, and just want to know that you're not alone, and we're so happy you were here tonight. Thank you to everyone. Georgie, Sam, and Sunday. Good night.
Bye.